So I was having coffee recently with this acquaintance of mine.
Okay.
He just sold his tech startup for a staggering amount of money. And you'd expect the cliche, right? The flashy watch, the Italian sports car.
All 9 yards, Phil.
Exactly. But instead, he shows up in this frayed, totally generic hoodie and, canvas sneakers that looked like they were literally falling apart at the seams.
I think I know where this is going.
Right. So for the first 20 minutes, he's actually lecturing me on radical minimalism. Yeah. He has this intense, almost moral superiority about it. He's liberated himself from the trap of material possession.
Of course he has.
But then the conversation takes this bizarre turn. He just casually mentions he's flying to a remote part of the Andes the next day.
A vacation.
That's what I asked. I said, oh, is it a vacation? And he shakes his head, no. He was going personally to source a specific single origin ceremonial cacao.
You're kidding.
Nope. Because he didn't trust the supply chain in the States. So he's essentially burning, thousands of dollars and days of his life just to make sure his morning hot chocolate is authentic.
Yeah.
And that contradiction it stopped me in my tracks. Here's a man performing poverty with his clothes while at the same time engaging in an act of resource waste so extreme it was almost comical.
That anecdote just, it perfectly nails the core insight that I think governs so much of human interaction.
Right.
The most profound, the most reliable, and the most trustworthy forms of communication are often the most costly. They're the most wasteful. And, on the surface, they seem completely counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive is the word.
Yeah, because what we often just dismiss as irrational behavior, like, flying across a hemisphere for cocoa beans, is in fact deeply rational when you look at it through the lens of evolutionary signaling. It's an ancient mechanism, just, adapted for the modern world.
That's what's so fascinating. That friend's behavior, it wasn't cheap at all. It was prohibitively expensive, yet he was performing humility. So our mission today is to really deep dive into how this relentless evolutionary mechanism, this need for what's called costly signaling, has migrated. It's no longer just confined to, physical displays like conspicuous consumption. It's moved into these abstract realms, into ideas, intellectual capital, specialized jargon, even digital conformity. And in doing so, it's not just establishing status anymore. It's driving these profound cognitive divides and I think fundamentally altering our relationship with truth and community.
We're basically going to be exploring the hidden biology and economics of the modern social flex.
Exactly. So let's get into it.
To really map out the abstract signals we see today, we absolutely have to start with the theoretical bedrock. And that's rooted deep in evolutionary biology and behavioral economics. We have to begin with the handicap principle.
The handicap principle. I love this idea. It's so wonderfully perverse. What is the specific logic there? How does a liability become an asset?
Well, the idea was first introduced by an Israeli biologist, Amat Zahavi, decades ago. And the idea is this. If an individual needs to reliably advertise a superior trait, whether that's robust health or strong genes or just resource abundance, the signal itself has to be genuinely burdensome.
A real handicap.
A real handicap. Zahavi's core logic is it's simple and brutally efficient. It's basically saying, if I can survive and thrive and reproduce while carrying this heavy handicap, then I must be truly superior and strong.
Okay, so the classic example is the peacock's tail.
The peacock's tail is the perfect example. I mean, think about it. It is a metabolic black hole. It demands massive resources to grow and to maintain and then to regrow it every single year.
And it must make them a target for predators.
A huge target. It dramatically slows the bird down, increasing its vulnerability. But it's precisely because it is such an ecological disaster that it's an honest signal. Only the highest quality males, the ones free from debilitating parasites or genetic defects, can actually afford to carry that magnificent, wasteful burden.
So any weaker male trying to grow a tail like that would just get eaten or starve.
Or starve, exactly. The signal is just too costly for a low-quality individual to fake. The price proves its honesty.
So the price paid the waste is the built-in truth serum. And this leads us directly to the core of costly signaling theory, or CST, which sort of applies this logic across all species, including, of course, us.
Right. CST tells us that credibility is directly proportional to the price you pay. I mean, human interaction is just flooded with what we call cheap talk.
Things like, I'm trustworthy, or I'm smart.
Or I am committed to this community, statements that cost nothing to produce. And because they cost nothing, cheap talk is inherently unreliable. Anyone can fake it. A signal only becomes credible if it requires you to, incinerate a substantial resource.
And that resource could be anything, right? Energy, time, money.
Physical risk, anything of value. In this context, waste isn't a sign of inefficiency. It is the currency of honesty. It's the only thing that guarantees the sincerity of the message.
And historically, we saw this mechanism manifest in the most straightforward way. I'm thinking of Thorstein Veblen and his idea of conspicuous consumption.
Yeah, Veblen. At the turn of the 20th century, he's observing the rise of these newly wealthy industrialists, and he basically codified this physical arms race.
He defined what he called positional goods.
Positional goods, things like luxury cars, rare jewelry, sprawling mansions, designer clothing. In the rapidly expanding anonymous urban societies of the industrial age, these things served as rapid, legible proxies for status.
So you might not know anything about the person walking past you on the street.
But the quality of their suit or the size of their car instantly established their approximate rank in the dominance hierarchy. And this consumption, it primarily fueled what we call intersexual competition.
So men competing with other men for mates, for example.
Exactly. Or, as Veblen noted, among wives seeking to elevate their household social standing. It was all about demonstrating rank.
But that physical arms race, it eventually hits a wall, doesn't it? When credit became cheap and global manufacturing just exploded, those old Veblen positional goods started to lose their signaling power.
They did. And that's the crucial historical transition we need to understand. By the late 20th century, you have mass production, you have high-quality counterfeits, you have accessible debt. It meant that many of those positional goods, a decent luxury car, a name-brand watch, were suddenly accessible to the upper middle class.
Or even the skilled working class in some cases.
Right. So the signal became corrupted. It got noisy. If everyone can acquire the symbol of status, that symbol loses its informational value for the elite. And this forced the elite to essentially abandon the traditional signals. They had to seek out new, non-material ways to signal that secure status.
They had to go from visible waste, like a gold-plated toilet,
to invisible resource-intensive waste, like your friend's cacao trip.
Which brings us back to the evolution of the signal itself. How do we move from flaunting a muscle car to flaunting something as abstract as, say, morality or conscientiousness?
This is where we have to look at human sexual selection. It didn't just stop at physical prowess. It profoundly shaped our abstract moral virtues, because those virtues functioned as supremely reliable fitness indicators.
So traits like kindness or fidelity, heroism, deep conscientiousness, these weren't just nice to have. They were actively selected for.
Actively selected for, because they were incredibly difficult to fake over a long period of time.
And I'm guessing they're hard to fake because they signal some kind of underlying biological health. Is that the idea?
That's precisely the idea. We categorize these as good genes indicators. If a person can coordinate complex, sustained social behavior like being reliably altruistic or incredibly organized, it indicates a highly developed, robust, and well-maintained brain.
So it's hard to pull off if your development was impaired.
Exactly. These virtues are difficult to display impressively if you have a high mutation load or poor underlying health. A chaotic, low-quality individual will find it nearly impossible to sustain the performance of high conscientiousness across decades. It's too demanding.
And they also function as indicators of a stable relationship partner too, right?
Yes, as good partner-parent indicators. When researchers look at what people seek for long-term relationships, across cultures, they consistently prioritize traits that signal reliability, trustworthiness, and the capacity for long-term cooperative investment.
Especially for raising children, which is a decades-long project.
The ultimate long-term project.
Yeah.
And the two traits that consistently top these lists are conscientiousness and agreeableness.
Okay, let's unpack those terms. Because in common usage, they sound pretty simple, but in this context, they're heavy with meaning. What does high conscientiousness actually signal about a person?
Right, so conscientiousness is much more than just being neat or detail-oriented.
Yeah.
It's really an umbrella term for these crucial subcomponents: willpower, organization, duty, deliberation, and self-discipline.
So a highly conscientious person is signaling genetic stability, emotional maturity.
And crucially, a capacity for delayed gratification. This is the behavioral evidence that the individual can stick to long-term plans, they can manage resources effectively, and they'll remain reliable during periods of stress. In an ancestral environment, and even today, this signaled a partner who wouldn't just abandon the family unit or squander resources on an impulse.
It's the ultimate long-term stability signal.
It really is.
And what about agreeableness? That sounds like the behavioral glue that holds it all together.
It is the social stability signal. Agreeableness encompasses warmth, kindness, sympathy, empathy, and non-aggressiveness. A high agreeableness partner signals a reduced likelihood of internal conflict, of abuse, or resource hoarding.
So people who lack agreeableness, who are aggressive, arrogant, emotionally volatile, they're just broadcasting that they'd be a bad long-term bet.
A terrible bet.
Yeah.
And sexual selection amplified these positive traits because, while they sometimes entail a personal cost like being kind to an undeserving peer, they offer massive reproductive and social benefits by securing cooperative partners.
Okay, so after the Veblen era failed, the elite had to find a new cost. And that cost became something more abstract, like virtue or specialized knowledge, or even this extreme self-handicapping, which cycles us right back to the man in the frayed hoodie.
That is the perfect mechanism of counter-signaling. It's the highest level of the status game. Once the entry-level signals, the tailored suits, the mid-range luxury watches become too widespread, the truly secure elite reject them outright.
The Silicon Valley billionaire in the generic t-shirt.
That's the one. He's making a profound high-stakes gamble. They are signaling secure status so abundantly and clearly that they don't need the cheap, easy props of wealth.
They're essentially saying, I am above the game that requires me to wear a uniform.
Exactly. That discarded hoodie is the costliest signal of all because it's a signal of disdain for the material hierarchy. By outwardly performing poverty or anti-fashion, they signal that their status is secured by non-material, non-transferable assets.
Things like intellectual reputation or a revolutionary business success or massive influence.
Things that can't be bought off a shelf. And this allows them to waste resources on invisible luxuries, like flying to the Andes to personally vet ceremonial cacao. The waste is astronomical, but it's obscured from the general public. It's only legible to their immediate, high-status peer group who understand the true economic cost of that time and travel.
So if that physical arms race is saturated and counter-signaling is sort of reserved for the ultra-elite, the frontier for signaling has clearly moved into the realm of abstract thought. And this brings us to this fascinating and I think very defining concept of luxury beliefs.
Luxury beliefs. They represent the new ideological frontier of status competition, and they're perfectly suited for an age of material abundance. These are not just any ideas. They are philosophical or political concepts adopted by the upper socioeconomic classes, often, highly educated urban populations, that serve to confer social status within their cohort.
And the defining feature, as you mentioned, is the insulation. They are insulated from the costs of those beliefs.
That is the core mechanism. The belief itself becomes the status badge. For example, advocating for the abolition of private vehicles when you live in a dense, well-served metropolitan area with great public transport.
Right. Or promoting complex, non-meritocratic hiring systems when you already have advanced degrees from top-tier institutions.
Exactly. These policies, if they were widely adopted, might create significant hardship for middle or lower-income families who rely on a car to get to work, or who are competing for entry-level positions without the benefit of those elite educational credentials.
So by holding the belief, you're signaling, I occupy such a privileged, secure position in the hierarchy, with financial buffers, access to elite networks, personal safety nets, that I can afford to champion ideas that would catastrophically impact those without my protection.
The ability to survive the negative externalities of your own ideology is the ultimate evolutionary flex. It's a statement of invulnerability. The status isn't derived from the intellectual truth of the belief, but from its costly nature and the evidence that the speaker has the resources to withstand its potential fallout. It's status through self-handicapping combined with systemic insulation.
And this competition, it's become hyper-abstracted in digital communities. We're seeing what we could call digital commitment as wasteful signaling. The Julian anecdote you told me about earlier is a perfect illustration of how intellectual capital itself can be deliberately wasted for status.
Julian, the developer, is the perfect case study of this hyper-abstracted signaling. He spends 6 months, mastering an esoteric programming language for a niche decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, and he knows the language has almost zero utility in the broader tech market.
So that effort is his wasted resource.
It's pure cognitive suffering.
It's the modern equivalent of the man flying to the Andes for cacao. But instead of burning thousands of dollars, Julian is burning thousands of hours of his finite mental energy on something that is deliberately obtuse.
It's a one-to-one parallel. The financial cost of the cacao trip is equivalent to Julian's expenditure of finite mental energy. Both are high-status individuals, burning a resource they possess in surplus money and mental processing power to prove they have that surplus.
And what is he signaling to that group?
He's signaling fanatical commitment to the community's ideology and, critically, a massive surplus of intellectual wattage. The language is archaic, the documentation is cryptic, the skill is non-transferable, and this all serves a strategic function for the in-group.
But why does the required knowledge have to be so difficult and useless? Why not just master a simple, highly productive language instead?
Because if the intellectual barrier to entry were simple, everyone could cross it. The signal would be cheap and worthless. To maintain prestige, the signal must be genuinely burdensome. It has to function as an intellectual handicap. By investing intense mental resources in something obtuse, Julian secures his high status among the few who are willing and capable of paying that steep cognitive cost.
So adherence to these complex, often counterintuitive, technological or philosophical ideologies in these digital noosphere communities, it's just a highly effective, costly signaling mechanism.
It's intellectual flexing, paying for prestige.
The knowledge itself is Julian's digital peacock tail. He's broadcasting. Look how much mental energy I can afford to burn on something that hurts my career prospects and offers no immediate mainstream utility.
And the adoption of these costly beliefs and, these intellectual expenditures, it inevitably leads to a phenomenon we can call social speciation.
Social speciation.
Yeah. The need to signal belonging and status drives groups to create these linguistic and ideological barriers that ultimately prevent communication and intergroup understanding.
And specialized language slang, technical jargon, moral shorthand, that's necessary for group cohesion, isn't it? It acts as a kind of verbal handshake.
Oh, absolutely. At the group level, specialized language is a highly efficient tool. When you correctly deploy that shared terminology, it's an instant confirmation of membership and cultural fluency.
It reinforces the in-group identity.
And it facilitates high-speed, nuanced communication among the members. However, this essential tool of cohesion instantly becomes a costly barrier when you view it from the outside.
And this brings us to that anecdote about the two brothers, Mark and David. The idea that two people raised in the same house can develop vocabulary so specialized that they become, mutually unintelligible is just striking.
It illustrates so powerfully how jargon drives this cognitive speciation. Mark, who's deeply immersed in the effective accelerationism, or E to community, and his brother David, embedded in the degrowth and social equity spheres. They adopted these specialized, often contradictory, mimetic complexes.
And they spent years learning this stuff.
Right. Years. Years learning this specific, complex, moral, and technical jargon just to belong to their respective online tribes. And that immersion, the time, the emotional investment, the rejection of alternative viewpoints, that is the costly part of the signal.
So the language they're using isn't just descriptive, it's a form of political and social action.
Precisely. Their language became a distinct, incompatible signaling system. To mispronounce a key term in Mark's Eeks community, or to use a term from David's social equity vocabulary in the wrong context, it instantly marks you as an outsider.
Someone who hasn't paid the cognitive cost of entry.
Right. The specialized vocabulary creates a barrier that is as real and effective as a physical wall. It drives these profound cognitive divides. This is social speciation in action, where divergent social groups just fortify themselves linguistically.
So the jargon acts as this continuous loyalty test, demanding not just knowledge, but this deep cultural fluency. What are the underlying psychological forces that make people adhere so strongly to these linguistic boundaries?
Well, there are two dominant mechanisms at play here. The first one is called uncertainty identity theory.
Okay.
Humans have this fundamental psychological need to reduce self-uncertainty, that feeling that you don't know who you are or where you belong. And strong group identification is the simplest and most effective way to alleviate that anxiety.
And how does language trigger that specific anxiety?
When an individual encounters unfamiliar in-group slang or specialized jargon, it instantly triggers self-uncertainty. It makes them think, do I really belong here? Have I misunderstood the group's core tenets? And paradoxically, this negative, aversive psychological state motivates the individual to identify more strongly with the group to secure their sense of belonging.
So they double down on the identity or degrowth to regain their psychological equilibrium.
The uncertainty is weaponized to deepen commitment. It's an internal psychological defense mechanism that strengthens the fort.
And what's the second mechanism?
That fort is further reinforced by ethno-linguistic identity theory. This theory focuses more on the collective defensive reaction. When a group perceives its identity or status to be under threat from an outgroup, When David's group feels attacked by the Isiac movement, or vice versa, the members lean heavily on their unique slang and dialect as a form of resistance and solidarity.
So if uncertainty identity theory is the personal anxiety that drives people inward, ethno-linguistic identity is the collective defensive shield they put up when they feel attacked.
That's a perfect analogy. This linguistic divergence serves to fortify the sense of us against them. The complex, specialized vocabulary isn't just a communication tool. It becomes a political declaration of distinction and group persistence.
And the cost of mastering the language grants the status, while the difficulty of the language ensures that only the truly committed high-status members can maintain fluency, which preserves the signaling value.
We're literally witnessing the linguistic evolution of tribes in real time.
So we've established how we willingly pay these cognitive costs to join human tribes. But now we have to turn to a more disturbing development. And that's the way artificial intelligence, these silicon gods, exploit our primal needs. Here, the costly signal is often an involuntary commitment elicited by the platform itself.
This is a major transition. We're moving from voluntary commitment to sophisticated neurological manipulation. We're talking about the dopamine trap. Social media platforms are meticulously engineered to exploit our neurological reward systems. They mimic the mechanisms of traditional behavioral addictions.
How does the dopamine system factor into just, my daily scrolling?
The dopamine system is central to reward, motivation, and habit formation. When we get a like, a share, or a comment, the brain releases a little shot of dopamine. This provides instant gratification and establishes a powerful reinforcing loop.
The cue, the action, the reward.
The cue, a notification buzz. The action, checking the phone. And the reward, digital validation. And neuroscientific studies consistently show that this compulsive digital engagement can induce changes in key brain regions involved in impulse control and addiction, paralleling the patterns we see in substance use disorders.
The cost is our time, our attention, our mental peace.
Right. And the platforms maximize this engagement by making the rewards unpredictable, which seems so counterintuitive if you're trying to design something pleasant to use.
But that unpredictability is the key to addiction, isn't it?
It is the absolute key to maximizing addiction potential. They employ what are called variable reward schedules. This is a concept drawn directly from behavioral psychology research, most famously from B.F. Skinner's work on operant conditioning. Notifications or desirable, highly charged content appear unpredictably, just like a slot machine paying out randomly.
And that variability maximizes anticipation.
It amplifies the dopamine release and locks in compulsive checking behavior far more effectively than a fixed, predictable schedule ever could.
And the result of this engineered environment is a state of engineered conformity within what we all recognize now as algorithmic echo chambers. How does this relentless focus on engagement and retention relate back to costly signaling?
Well, the algorithms, which are optimized purely for engagement, they quickly learn that emotionally charged, polarizing, and homogeneous content retains users the longest. Features like infinite scrolling and personalized recommendation systems create these algorithmic echo chambers, which drastically reduce a user's exposure to conflicting ideas.
And this technological design capitalizes on some deeply ingrained human biases.
Two fundamental ones.
Let's start with confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is just our innate tendency to seek out and preferentially interpret information that supports our existing attitudes and beliefs. We simultaneously ignore or discount anything that contradicts them. If I believe a certain political candidate is great, I will seek out news that confirms that belief. The algorithm simply automates and supercharges this process, providing a continuous, curated stream of information that validates the user's worldview and fosters cognitive consistency.
And the second bias is cognitive dissonance theory.
Right. This is the psychological discomfort people experience when they're faced with conflicting ideas, information, or attitudes. A classic example outside of social media. Imagine someone pays an exorbitant amount for a gym membership they rarely use.
We've all been there.
To avoid the discomfort of knowing they wasted their money, they'll rationalize. They'll say the act of having the membership is valuable, or that they love the idea of fitness. They resolve the dissonance through self-deception. In the algorithmic echo chamber, avoiding this dissonance is an automated process. Disconfirming content is filtered out before it can even reach you, and you can remain internally consistent with minimal cognitive effort.
This continuous, highly curated loop leads to what cognitive scientists call cognitive rigidity. It's a reduced ability to revise one's beliefs or frameworks in the face of new, disconfirming information. The algorithm is essentially conditioning us toward intellectual inflexibility.
And this brings us to the terrifying example of Alara, the content creator. It perfectly encapsulates the involuntary, costly signal. Alara knows that the silicon god, the recommendation algorithm, favors high-energy, hyper-edited, outrage bait commentary.
A style that's fundamentally draining for most people.
It requires her to inhabit an anxious, aggressive persona that goes completely against her natural disposition. It spikes her anxiety and her cortisol levels.
I think we've probably all been Alara at some point, feeling that internal pressure to post something polarizing just to get the views or the engagement boost. That surrender of your inner peace, your authentic voice. That's a very real cost.
It is a biologically costly act. Alara is sacrificing her mental peace, her emotional equilibrium, and her cognitive sovereignty. She's doing this to signal her devotion to the platform's logic. She is signaling, I am a faithful node in your network. I am willing to degrade my own emotional and cognitive operating system to spread your signal, even if it harms me.
That surrender of one's humanity and emotional stability is the price you pay for algorithmic status.
For views. For the digital currency of visibility. The algorithms subtly manipulate our dopamine circuits to elicit these painful behaviors, and in doing so, they contribute to the re-engineering of the human operating system, where the cost of being seen is the loss of one's inner authentic self.
Okay, so we've covered our biological drive for status, the cultural fortification of our groups, and the technological exploitation of our neurology. Now, we confront what should be our final line of defense, our own intelligence. Yet you argue that high intelligence doesn't protect us. In fact, it can amplify the problem. This is the intelligence trap.
This is, for me, perhaps the most unsettling finding in modern cognitive science. Higher intelligence does not guarantee accurate perception or rational decision-making. In fact, large-scale studies show that higher reasoning ability can often correlate with greater political bias and stronger ideological distortions, especially when the topic touches on group identity.
That seems completely counterintuitive. I mean, we assume that better cognitive tools should lead to better outcomes. Why isn't being smarter the cure for irrationality and bias?
The core issue is the evolutionary purpose of intelligence. Our intelligence did not evolve primarily to maximize objective truth or scientific fidelity. It evolved to maximize status, belonging, and success within our specific social environment.
So if you're highly intelligent, you're just better equipped to win arguments.
You're better equipped to win arguments, persuade others, and rise in the dominance hierarchy, often regardless of whether your core belief is actually true. The intelligence is a tool for social success, not necessarily for epistemic hygiene.
So intelligence doesn't necessarily improve our will to truth. It just massively improves our skill of justification. It enables rationalization rather than true rationality.
Exactly. The more intelligent the person, the more elaborate and compelling the self-deception they can construct to defend a pre-existing emotionally loaded belief. They have the cognitive horsepower to build these intricate intellectual fortresses around biases that simpler individuals just couldn't manage.
And we see this operating through identity protective cognition, or IPC.
Yes, IPC. This just means we use our intelligence specifically to defend beliefs that align with our group or our status. It essentially makes our brilliant minds subservient to our ego and identity. When ego and identity are on the line, the sophisticated tools of intelligence are deployed to defend the tribe, not to find objective truth.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A highly credentialed climate scientist might use their skills to rigorously defend the minutiae of a certain policy, not necessarily because the policy is perfect, but because defending that policy signals absolute loyalty to their professional and moral cohort. The smarter the person, the more subtle and difficult their self-deception is to detect, both by others and, crucially, by themselves.
That raises a really important question. If intelligence evolved to maximize status, is there any hope for genuine objectivity and high-level thought? Or is all sophisticated academic work just sophisticated signaling within tribal hierarchies?
That is the tragic realization, I think. True objectivity is always a struggle against our fundamental biological machinery. And this mechanism drives the adoption of what we can call fashionably irrational beliefs, or FIBs.
FIBs.
These are ideas, often academically complex or socially extreme, that signal high status or absolute group belonging, even when they are logically absurd, empirically unfounded, or internally contradictory.
So accepting an absurd or contradictory belief becomes a deliberate loyalty test.
It is a cost. By publicly embracing an irrational stance, you pay a significant cognitive cost. The cost of intellectual dissonance and the potential loss of credibility outside your in-group to signal that your commitment to the tribe is absolute. You're proving that you value belonging, identity, and status over objective truth.
This is why highly educated societies, counterintuitively, can be the most capable of systemic delusion and ideological homogeneity.
Because their intellectual tools enable sophisticated collective self-deception and the effective filtering of any dissent.
So, if pure computational intelligence is such a poor shield against this evolutionary drive, what does offer a path toward genuine rationality?
Well, true rationality isn't characterized by raw intelligence, but by intellectual virtues, primarily humility and curiosity.
Humility.
Humility means recognizing how easily one's formidable intellect can be misled and accepting that the drive to serve identity is constant and relentless. And curiosity, on the other hand, is the antidote to ideological rigidity. It generates knowledge gaps that motivate you to seek out heterogeneous, contradictory information rather than simply settling for the cognitive comfort of the echo chamber. You know, when we synthesize this entire deep dive, from the wasteful peacock tale to the millionaire in the frayed hoodie to the programmer performing cognitive suffering, and finally to the algorithm preying on our dopamine circuits, we really see a single unifying evolutionary process. The ancient, unrelenting need to signal fitness and belonging has simply migrated from physical waste into these hyper-abstract ideological credentials and algorithmic subservience. The environment has changed dramatically, but the primal engine driving human behavior remains constant.
And the cruel truth of that engine is that the competition for status is inherently tragic. It's governed by a status treadmill where any gain is always relative, never absolute. If everyone adopts the new signal, the baseline just resets higher, forcing the signals to become ever more extreme and costly.
From massive tails to Porsches
to esoteric programming languages, and ultimately to sacrificing your internal peace for algorithmic validation. It's a perpetual gnawing drive for relative advantage that just consumes vast amounts of human energy.
The ultimate freedom, if it can be found at all, lies in recognizing the nature of this ruthless biological calculus. Understanding that we are all, by design, genetically programmed players in an eternal theater of competition. That recognition grants a detached clarity regarding the powerful biological forces that govern human thought and behavior, regardless of the symbolic, abstract forms those forces take today. It's the difference between being a blind subject of the game and a lucid player observing the rules being enforced.